government department cuts ties with Greenpeace after their protest at the Prime Minister's home. The roof of his constituency house was draped in black fabric in an anti-oil protest, raising questions about his security. Also this lunchtime, payouts for living in the shadow of pylons, where there could be compensation if one appears near you. Plus, controversial influencer Andrew Tate is released from house arrest in Romania. A defiant Trump pleads not guilty to trying to overturn the 2020 election. He says it was a persecution.
Sunset is a one-woman play written by and performed by me.
And turn that frown upside down. Comedians come to the rescue after only one person turned up to a one-woman show.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Kylie Pentelow.
Good afternoon. A government department is ending its ties with Greenpeace after the group scaled the roof of the Prime Minister's constituency home in North Yorkshire, whilst Rishi Sunak and his family are on holiday in the United States. The eco-activists camped out on the roof and draped it with black fabric. Now, DEFRA say they'll no longer hold meetings with the environmental campaigners, claiming they're not a serious organisation. Conservative and Labour politicians have condemned the stunt. Greenpeace, however, insist what they did was right. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan now on the backlash.
The Sunaks have been posing for a few happy photographs of their family holiday in Southern California. But what happened to their family home in North Yorkshire yesterday is the subject of intense debate back here. 5 Greenpeace activists who were arrested over their involvement in the protest on and around the Prime Minister's constituency home have now been released on police bail. Greenpeace say they deliberately chose a time when the Sunak family were not at home.
We arrived very calmly, we knocked on the door just to triple check, and then our climbers went up the building to send this message to a Prime Minister who earlier in the week agreed 100 new oil and gas licences, flying in the face of what the scientists are telling us we need to do in order to keep our climate safe.
But given the obvious security implications, there have been questions about the level of police protection at the house in the first place, although ministers are reluctant to go into detail.
The security is always on the forefront of minds of MPs. I won't particularly comment on the Prime Minister's security arrangements, but this is exactly why we brought in the new Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act quite recently, which the Labour Party voted against, because it's not just MPs. Ordinary people are having their lives disrupted by these protesters.
But even opposition politicians think Greenpeace have overstepped the mark in targeting a family home.
It's not acceptable to target somebody's home like that. It's not okay. It's not okay. The effect on, I don't care what political party you are, the effect on somebody's family like that is not acceptable at all.
Today, the Department for the Environment said they would no longer have any dealings with Greenpeace. A source there telling ITV News they're not a serious organisation and we're not going to treat them seriously.
So, Carl, how significant is it then that DEFRA have cut ties with Greenpeace?
Well, Greenpeace themselves have responded to this with a bit of a shrug, really, saying that the government had already been gradually disengaging with them even before their stunt yesterday. And I don't think that it means that their central arguments will no longer be heard either, because there are plenty of even Conservative MPs who think that the government has made the wrong decision in allowing new oil and gas licences to be signed at a time of climate change. The government's argument, obviously, as many people will know, is that this new production is necessary so that the country is no longer dependent on oil and gas from places like, for example, Russia, during the period in which the country is transitioning to net zero and basically trying to wean itself off any oil and gas at all. So I think that argument will still be heard within government. But what still remains shocking, where there's still many questions to be answered, is how they got there in the first place. And I mean, I find it shocking given the level of security and the layers of security that I have to go through every day around Parliament, around Westminster, especially going into Downing Street. Anywhere the Prime Minister goes, there's pretty high security. And of course, we have seen attacks on MPs and on Westminster in recent years as well. So there are big questions for the police to answer around this. But I would say that many of those questions will be asked and answered in private because, as you heard from my report, the government really doesn't like discussing in the open anything to do with the security around senior ministers.
Carl Dinnan, thank you. Households could be paid not to protest against new power lines being built near their homes. That's one of the proposals being made as ministers try to radically overhaul the national grid. A report commissioned by the government says people living close to new pylons should receive lump sum payments and upgrades to their homes. It also calls for a public campaign to explain why the massive upgrades are necessary. The government says it wants to halve the time it takes to build pylons across the UK to speed up access to renewable energy like wind and nuclear power. Well, our political correspondent Libby Vina is in Essex for us this lunchtime. Libby, a big report today. Why do we need so many more pylons?
Well, essentially, we do need to upgrade the national grid, partly to connect offshore wind power onto the land to get to where it's needed, but also because we're building new nuclear power stations. And in addition, because our need for electricity is going to increase as people switch to electric cars and start installing heat pumps. But the fact is that will require a lot more power lines across the country and more pylons. And here in Essex, people are already extremely angry at one proposal. One farmer we spoke to is expecting to see 4 pylons across his land, 50 metres high, each of them.
Pylons are old technology. Unfortunately, at present, that's what we've been offered is pylons. And for me, it will cut the farm in half. And so there'll be a visual scar on the landscape. National Grid can put them there, but government policy is pylons are acceptable. And that is the issue, is government's policy is they're acceptable.
Well, I think in recognition that this policy might not be that popular, the report's author today, Nicholas Windsor, has suggested that there could be payments for people to stop them protesting. But I think here that would be a case of too little, too late. Already thousands of people have signed a petition demanding that the government think again and perhaps look at the idea of an underground cable round the coast. Now, that could be a lot more expensive, ministers are likely to point out, but the farmer that I spoke to said that if they are really serious about compensation, actually putting pylons across people's land could end up being very expensive too.
Libby Vina, thank you. The world's oceans have hit their warmest ever recorded temperature. That's according to the EU's climate change service, Copernicus. The oceans reached an average daily temperature of 20.96 degrees Celsius this week, far above average for this time of year. Scientists have warned it's a result of climate change. Heavy rain and high water levels continue to hit northeastern China, with thousands of people forced from their homes. At least 20 people have been killed in Beijing's outer suburbs. Another 27 were missing following storms over the weekend. Meanwhile, heavy rains have caused flash floods and landslides in parts of Slovenia, blocking roads and bridges and forcing evacuations. A state of emergency has been declared in nearly all of the country after a month's amount of rainfall fell within 24 hours in northern, northwestern and central areas. Social media influencer Andrew Tate has been released from house arrest in Romania, having won an appeal. The controversial influencer had been held there, charged with human trafficking, rape and forming an organised crime group. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Vincent McAviney. Vincent, he's been released from house arrest and has been speaking just in the last hour. What's he had to say?
Yeah, that's right. Andrew and his brother Tristan were first arrested and remanded in prison in December. They were then placed under house arrest in March, and in June they were charged, as you say, with rape and human trafficking offences. Now, this morning they won their appeal on house arrest. They can now move freely around the Romanian capital Bucharest and the district that they live in. Andrew Tate made a statement a short while ago outside his home.
They said that I hurt people and I make a lot of money from criminal enterprise, and here we stand 7 or 8 months later and I've not seen a single victim on the news. I don't know if you have. I've seen lots of girls sticking up for me, lots of people defending me. I've not seen a single person stand up and say that I have hurt them, not one. I've done nothing wrong. God knows I've done nothing wrong. In my heart, I know I've done nothing wrong. I think the people at home who with a functioning brain understand we've done nothing wrong, because nobody has yet to identify a single victim which is saying that we've done anything to them.
He still faces serious charges. They've imposed some restrictions.
Yes, that's right. Romanian authorities accused the brothers and 2 female Romanian associates of forming an organised criminal group in 2021 to commit human trafficking, not just in Romania, but in other countries, including the US and the UK as well. Now, the indictment names 7 alleged victims who say they were recruited by the Tate brothers through false promises of love and marriage. Now, given the seriousness of those allegations, the court has imposed conditions on the brothers. They must report to the police when ordered to. They cannot change address without informing authorities, and they must not contact their 2 co-accused, any of the witnesses and the alleged victims or their families. If they do, they might find themselves back under house arrest or indeed being remanded in prison once again. And several women in Britain are also pursuing civil claims against Andrew Tate, alleging they too were victims of sexual violence.
Vincent, thank you. The government's announced plans to expand private sector involvement in the NHS as it attempts to tackle the backlog of cases in England. Health Secretary Steve Barclay said 13 new community diagnostic centres will be opened across England, 8 operated by the private sector. Labour says the government has failed to make enough use of private capacity, claiming over 300,000 patients could have been treated since January of last year. Donald Trump was his usual defiant self following his court appearance, where he pleaded not guilty to the most serious charges he's ever faced. It was, he said, a persecution. At a historic court hearing, the former president denied 4 charges, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, which includes conspiring to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Our US correspondent Dan Rivers reports from Washington.
Well, what a day America witnessed yesterday.
Former President Donald Trump yesterday pled not guilty to all 4 felony counts.
This morning, there was still only one story in the United States, which was dominating the airwaves.
Donald Trump all day, 24 hours a day.
Donald Trump has largely stayed away from Washington since he was defeated in 2020, but he had no choice about his visit yesterday. The convoy swept him into the heart of the capital, named after the country's first president, past the great monument to George Washington, towards the scene of the January the 6th insurrection, to answer charges which surely would have left the founding fathers profoundly troubled. We've seen Donald Trump in court before, but this is by far the most serious and politically charged indictment. He's accused of undermining a foundational principle of American democracy, the peaceful transfer of power. He pleaded not guilty to 4 counts, which centred around his attempts to overturn the results of the election. Outside the court, the political battles which have riven this nation for years continued in full-throated fury.
How about you get paid? Lock up Trump. Lock up Trump.
Tell the
Lock
judge.
up Trump.
Tell the judge.
Lock up Trump.
This is a polity which shows no sign of healing.
I hope Trump goes up another 5 points in the polls today, thanks to the indictment.
It's personally embarrassing to me to have the whole world look at us like this.
The case will revolve around the storming of the Capitol on January the 6th. And the attempts to overturn the election result which preceded it. At its heart will be one question. Did Trump know he'd lost when he claimed he'd won?
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
As he left Washington last night, Donald Trump's defiance was once again on display.
This is a persecution of a political opponent. This was never supposed to happen in America. This is the persecution of the person that's leading by very, very substantial numbers in the Republican primary and leading Biden by a lot. So if you can't beat them, you persecute them or you prosecute them. We can't let this happen in America. Thank you very much.
He'd spent less than 2 hours in the capital, but the ramifications of his appearance are profound. The next hearing is at the end of the month, when the timetable will be set for this unprecedented case of the United States versus Donald J. Trump. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Washington.
Here, the Met Office has named the latest storm to hit our shores. They warn Storm Anthony is forecast to bring unseasonably strong winds and heavy rain to the UK tomorrow. There are yellow warnings in place for rain in Northern Ireland, and there's a yellow warning in place for Wales, the southwest of England and parts of the South English coast, with strong winds forecast. The future of the Commonwealth Games is in question after Alberta in Canada pulled out of its bid to host the event in 2030. The last Commonwealth Games were held in Birmingham. Just weeks ago, Victoria in Australia withdrew from hosting the 2026 Games, blaming rising costs. The Tourism and Sport Minister for Alberta said the bill was estimated at the equivalent of £1.5 billion. And finally, to the one-woman show at the Edinburgh Fringe, where just one person turned up to watch. And now, after the tears of Georgie Greer, some of Britain's best-known comedians have tried to raise a laugh and make her smile when they offered her their support. Sharon Thomas now on the performer who may just have the last laugh.
Sunset is a one-woman play written by and performed by me. But will there be a happily ever after? That is the big question.
The answer is a not particularly funny no. Actress Georgie Greer shared a photo of herself crying on social media, saying that when she performed her one-woman play at the Fringe, just one person turned up. Georgie's outpouring of emotion led to words of comfort from celebrities who had similar experiences early in their own careers.
It's absolutely normal, for one person to rock up to your show, especially at the beginning of Edinburgh, and also for you to be a bit upset or annoyed. But you know what? You're on the path and it's just the start, that's all. And tomorrow will be better and next week will be better.
And fellow comedian Dara O'Brien said, "Soon you'll dine out on this anecdote. More than once I had to buy my audience a drink as a thank you for being the only ones there." The London-based actress and podcaster wrote and stars in Sunsets, about a woman fascinated by romantic comedies and hoping for her own, walking off into the sunset moment.
Madam, if you can take that cute little child and woohoo!
Georgie's up against it in Edinburgh. The Fringe is the largest arts festival in the world, with more than 3,000 shows to choose from this month. Around 2 million tickets have been sold for the Fringe. Georgie is back on stage again today, hoping at least a handful will be coming her way. Sharon Thomas, ITV News.
And that's it this lunchtime. The latest Where You Are is coming up next. Lucrezia will be here with the ITV Evening News at 6:30. But from everyone here, enjoy your afternoon. Bye-bye.